and also how you can add electronic signatures that are legally binding to your frevvo forms to enhance that aspect of it. I've also got on the line with me Samantha from our accounts team, and she will be helping to field your questions as we go. So we'll talk a little bit about what frevvo is for anyone on the call who might be new to frevvo. We'll then get into what exactly makes a signature legally binding, and then we'll do a frevvo demo. But at any time, you can ask a question by typing it into the GoToWebinar questions panel, and Sam will either answer your question on the spot, or we may answer your question live during or at the end of the webinar. Now, as a side note, we are actually recording this webinar, and you will get a copy of the recording afterwards. So with that, let's dive right in. So if you're not familiar with frevvo, we are a simple 100% visual software that allows you to automate your back-end processes. So you can create workflows with very little IT support. You know, in fact, my own personal background is in nonprofit management, not in the technical world at all, and I'm able to easily create forms and workflows in frevvo just with that business background. Now, this is going to really help to bring your processes into the digital world, which, as we all know from the last couple of years of remote work, is super critical. We need to be able to automate. We need to be able to digitize, and many of our customers have found that to be true across a number of different verticals. So hopefully you see some familiar names on this slide, but we're serving customers in the higher education field, also in K through 12 education, governments, including you know, police departments and just state agencies, and then other industries as well. So just about any kind of business has some process that they need to automate, and they can do so with frevvo. And what you'll find is that frevvo can really be used for any number of different types of processes. So we have many customers using it in the HR realm, for example, for a new hire onboarding. Instead of having employees fill out numerous paper forms where they have to fill out, in many cases, the same information, their name, address, social security number, over and over and over again. With frevvo, you can collect that information once and map it through to all of the forms that you need. You can also do field validation, which makes sure that your data is accurate and eliminates that back and forth. You'll also see frevvo used for approval workflows, such as a purchase order, and we'll actually look at one of those today, where a particular form might need to route through a number of different individuals or departments for approval or collaboration. Frevvo handles that seamlessly. Now, frevvo is a complete enterprise-grade solution. So today you'll see that we're focusing in on our legally binding digital signature feature, but from looking at this slide, you'll see there are a number of other attractive features, including that it is accessible. We make the designers very user-friendly with drag and drop tools and visual business logic, really no code required at all. If you do happen to have a technical background or you want to customize with code, frevvo also allows for that as well. And it's mobile friendly and works in any language. So lots of dynamic options here. All right, so now let's start diving into the topic of this webinar, which is legally binding electronic signatures. So what makes a signature legally binding, in particular an electronic signature? Well, it turns out that there are actually two landmark federal laws that have been on the books for about 20 years, and those are e-sign and the UETA, which I think is the Uniform Electronic Transactions Act. Now, these apply in most states, Puerto Rico, DC, and Guam. For any states where these federal laws don't apply, the state typically has an identical law on the state books. So really, the acceptance of electronic signatures as legally binding has a long history and a long precedent, and is really quite widely accepted. Now, a little distinction here between electronic and digital signatures. Electronic signature is a very broad term. It's really any way to sign a document without a pen and paper. That could be with a squiggle of your finger, an image, like on Adobe, you might be able to save your signature image and drag and drop it into any form. It could also be a sound, you know, if you're working with a visually impaired software of some kind. It can really be a symbol. It could be anything that is not pen and paper. So it's a very broad term. A digital signature is a specific category or type of electronic signature that uses a technical protocol. What we're talking about today with that technical protocol is typically PKI, or public key encryption, and digital certificates. And these are the commonly used protocols used by frevvo, DocuSign, and other large e-sign companies as well. The point of the PKI and the digital certificate is to reliably identify the signer and also to secure that transaction from tampering, to ensure that the data hasn't been manipulated. And those two factors make that transaction legally binding. Now, here's a little bit of terminology for you. We'll be talking about this as we go through today. This has to do with kind of how that PKI infrastructure works. So a hash is a fixed length string that's generated by this numerical or this math function based on the data. So if any element of the data is changed, that hash is regenerated, and it is unique for any given set of data. So if I generate a hash with one set of data, go back and change that data in any way, regenerate the hash, you'll see it's a different hash. So that hash represents the data. Then you have public and private keys, which are a pair of keys generated for an entity. And just as their names imply, public keys are visible and available to anyone. Private keys are not shared. Then you have a certificate authority. This is a entity or organization that certifies that the public key is real, and a digital certificate that identifies the entity, embeds the public key, and then the certificate authority kind of certifies that this key belongs to this entity. So a little bit like a passport, you can think of it. So this is very broad, of course, but hopefully this is going to start giving you a little bit of an idea of how this technology works. So bear with me as we go through this chart that kind of explains how the life cycle, if you will, of encrypting a digital signature. So you have your data, and we're going to run a hash function on that data to create that fixed string. Now that fixed string or hash is encrypted using your private key, and that ultimately becomes your signature. Paired with the certificate that, remember, embeds the public key and verifies the owner or the entity of that public key, those attach to the data, and that becomes your digitally signed data. Now, on the receiving end, we want to verify that digitally signed data. So we're going to take that data, we're going to run the hash function on it again to discover what the hash is. And that's sort of the left side of the right half of the chart here. At the same time, we're going to take that signature, decrypt it using the public key, and that's going to allow us to see the hash associated with the signature. If those two hashes match, then you know that the signature is valid. If any data had been changed, remember, the hash function would have generated a different hash, and it would then no longer match. So that's sort of how this technology in the background is validating our signatures. Now, there's a few other criteria that come into play with these laws that sort of make a signature legally binding. One is intent to sign. So typically a user has to physically click a button, make a mark, do something to indicate an intent to sign. It cannot be a passive process. Reliable identification of parties, of course, is very important. We need to know that who is signing is who they say they are. Disclosure and consent means that the user knows this is a digital signature and consents to that. Of course, electronic capture is probably a given based on what we're talking about here today. We also want to make sure that that data cannot be manipulated once the signature is applied. It's secure from tampering. The transaction should have some document retention policy in place and access to the document by the parties in question. And there should also be an audit trail for the digital transactions. So frevvo is going to meet all of these depending on which signature type you choose. And this chart will show you a little bit of what I'm talking about. Now, frevvo has 3 different types of digital signatures that I will show you today. The first, and that is this this first column here, signature field, is a very flexible option. It allows for signing by any user, including an anonymous user who perhaps just accessed a form that's embedded on your website or a link in a newsletter or anything like that. This meets most of those criteria. However, the signature field doesn't identify parties. It doesn't have, you don't have to be logged in, or it doesn't do any other specific identification. And it doesn't specifically encrypt or secure that data from tampering. Now, this is often considered legally binding, even though it doesn't meet those 2 large criteria. And you'll see that this is very commonly used by other form software, you know, all the time. So in many cases, this is enough, depending on your specific business scenario. Now, frevvo also offers another type of digital signature, which can be applied by an anonymous user, meaning they don't necessarily have to have an account in your system, but we will verify their identity by email. Now, this is, again, very common. This is what DocuSign uses, Adobe, but lots of other e-sign companies use this. Even though it doesn't identify a party through a secure login, it does identify them by email. And that is, again, often considered legally binding and a reliable identification. And then finally, we have an identity verification through your login, which can be through the frevvo built-in security manager or through security manager integration. If you're using Google SAML, Okta, Azure, Active Directory, you can connect those to frevvo and have your users log in securely through your own security manager. And then frevvo will identify that party through their login as they sign. So let's take a look in a demo of exactly what each of those different signature types looks like. So I'm going to pop out of our PowerPoint and over here into frevvo. Now I am in the frevvo application and I'm logged in as a designer user. So I have a number of different projects here, and I'm going to go into this form called field trip permission slip. Now this might be a form used by a school, and probably this form is going to be filled out by a parent who is not necessarily a user in the school's system. So we would consider that from the frevvo perspective an anonymous user. So this is a good use case for the signature field. Perhaps the parent clicks a link on the website, or you send home a newsletter and the link is in the newsletter. Those are ways that the parent might access this form. So you can see that I've already built into this form a number of different fields to collect you know, name, telephone, other information. And what I'm going to do is add a signature and a date field to this form. So over on the left side of this designer, I have a palette of controls, which are basically field templates I can add to the form. I'm going to find the signature field, drag it over to the designer, and just drop it where I want it to go at the bottom here. Now I can also relabel this. So I'm going to label it please sign here. And I can adjust the width of it. In this case, I don't want it to take up quite the full width of the screen, but we'll take up about 3/4 there. And I also want to add a date. So I'm going to grab a date control from the top here. I'll drag it beside the signature. We'll call it date signed. And then again, I'm going to adjust the width so it just sits neatly beside the signature. Now I can, I'm actually going to build in some quick business logic that will automatically fill this date at the time the signature is applied. So I really don't need the user to, be able to enter data here. So I'm going to disable this. And I'm also going to remove the decorator and the little date picker because we don't need those if we're going to populate it automatically. So let me show you how quick it is to build such business logic. I'm going to come over here to the rules editor, add a new business rule. And I'm going to run our visual rule builder. Now this allows me to build custom logic without needing to know any JavaScript code at all. It walks you through step by step how to build that logic. So I'm going to first add a condition, which is that anytime the signature, I believe it was please sign here is what I named it, is filled, then I want the signed date signed, to be set to today. Now today is a function that's going to get the current date and populate it in that date control. I also want to set an else condition. So if that signature is removed for any reason, I want to unset the date signed. So in this case, I will set it to empty. Then I can click finish and I can visually see my rule written out here. So I can sort of double check it, know that that's exactly what that rule does. And now we are going to run this form, but I'm going to run it in a fresh browser because I want to make sure I'm running this form as an anonymous user who is not logged into frevvo. So we'll save it, and then I'll show you how we can grab a share link to share this with our parents. I'm going to grab this link. And then let's open up a new browser here. Now I'm definitely not logged into frevvo in this browser, so I'll run this URL. And this would be the experience of your, students' parents who might be filling out this form. So we'll just go ahead and fill this in. A little email here. And now we're at the point where we're ready to sign. So this signature field is not going to validate my identity at all. It's just going to let me draw my signature. So when I click here, a light box pops up and I can simply draw the signature. Now, if you're using an iPhone or any other mobile device, a tablet or any smartphone, you can draw this with your finger right on the touch screen. If you have accessibility turned on, which in many cases you would, especially for a school-related form, you would also see an option here to type the signature. So very flexible. I'm going to click done, and you'll see that my signature is applied right here on the form, and our custom logic ran and populated the date as well. Now, I'm going to show you by clicking this print button that we can also generate a PDF from this form. So this is the kind of thing you might want to save this to your Google Drive or another file system. You might want to email a copy to the parent at the end of the flow. And basically, frevvo will generate this PDF version of the form. It includes that signature just as it was drawn in the form, as well as all of the other data that you've set to be printable. All right. So that is basically how our, I'll go ahead and submit it. That is basically how our signature field works. And if I pop back over here to our chart, just a reminder, this is, it's basically hitting all of the criteria, except it's not specifically identifying the party through login or email or anything like that. And it's not securing that data from tampering through any kind of encryption. You could write some custom logic that would set, all of the fields to disabled after the signature is applied in a very similar way to how I set that date when the signature was applied, but it's not necessarily going to be double checking the hash as it, unencrypts the signature like we saw earlier. So now let's take a look at our other two signature types, email verification and identity verification. For this, I'm going to use the basic purchase order process. Now, this is a simple workflow. I haven't built it out to be very sophisticated because I just wanted to focus on showing you guys signatures. But you can see here, this is a 3-step workflow. The idea is that an employee will kick off a purchase order, a manager will approve it, and it will go out to a vendor who is an anonymous user, meaning they're not logging into our system, to sign it. Now, if we look into the manager step on the assignment tab, we'll see that this is assigned to a specific user in our system. If we look likewise at the vendor step, I have this assigned to an email address. So this user would be outside of our system. Now you can hard code this email and also the user just as I have today, or you can set this dynamically so that it would be assigned to whatever email was set at runtime. So it might be an email that the employee enters on step 1 and step 3 is ultimately assigned to that email. So let's go in and take a look at the forms inside this workflow. So in this case, we have a single form that routes around to those different parties. It consists of this purchase order information. Well, we've also got at the top here a PO number, date, and some employee info that will pre-populate automatically. I'll show you what that looks like. Then we enter the order information. Then we have a manager approval section and also a vendor approval section. So we're now going to apply signatures, digital signatures, to these sections. The first one we're going to do is this order information. This is what the employee would fill out on step 1. To apply a digital signature, in this case, we're going to click on the section header, then go to the security tab, and we'll set the signature to text signature image. I'm also going to check must sign, which makes the signature required. Now you can see that when I set that, the section got this nice little signature block at the bottom of it. This includes a button to sign this section, as well as a consent message to meet that criteria of providing intent and consent. Now, when we run this, because it is a text signature, it's going to apply a little text stamp of the user's info. The employee will be logged in when they run this form. So frevvo will check their login information and apply their text stamp at the bottom here. Now you also in frevvo, you can upload a signature image for an individual user. If you had such an image, this would apply the image instead of the text stamp. Now on the manager step, the manager is also a user in our system. So very similarly, we're going to go to the security tab. This time I'll set a wet signature and must sign. Really, it looks identical here in the designer. The only difference is that when the manager signs, it'll let them do a signature drawing instead of a text stamp. Now, finally, let's go down to the vendor. Now, if you remember, the vendor is assignment is set to an email address. However, I'm going to use the same procedure to add a signature here. In this case, I'll add another wet signature and I'll say must sign. Again, in the designer, this looks identical to the other two signature sections. However, what you will see at runtime is that instead of identifying or verifying the identity in the background, frevvo is going to pop up a window to ask the user to verify their email address. And it'll verify their identity based on that. All right. So I think we're ready to test this. Okay. Now I'm going to just run this form in test mode because I do want to start it as a logged in user, the employee. One cool thing about frevvo is that when you're running in test mode, you actually can see the form in tablet or mobile view as well. So just a little fun thing to point out. And you'll also notice that I have some business logic in the background that is pre-filling a purchase order number, a date, and my own employee information for the employee I happen to be logged in as at the moment. So all of that gets pre-filled, saves the user time, and ensures data validity. And now I'm going to order some widgets. We've got some logic in the background that's subtotaling this for me. I could also, if I wanted to, add a file from my computer. Just add a random image here, but most likely you would be adding a copy of an invoice or some other specification there. And now that I've completed my purchase order, I'm ready to sign it. So I am a logged in user. You can see I'm logged in as Maya Hoffman. And I'm going to just click sign this section. I know I'm consenting because of the little message. And in the background, frevvo checks my identity, puts my text and date stamp here on the form, locks down this section, so all of this other stuff becomes disabled. And it also lets me know that this was digitally signed through identity verification. And then you'll see this little kind of unique ID right underneath my signature. This is unique to every signature that you do in frevvo. So if I were to, and actually let me just copy this because I want to show you. If I were to unsign this section, regardless of whether I edit any data or not, and then re-sign it, you'll see that this unique ID is different. Let me just pull over, oh, whoops, wrong thing. Let me just pull over my text pad here to show you that those two IDs are in fact different because they were two different signatures. So that kind of feeds into what we were talking about earlier with the unique hash that helps us verify that no data has been tampered with as the workflow goes along. Okay, now I'm going to click send to manager. And this is going to go to my manager, Jerry. So I'm going to open back up another browser, log in as Jerry, and we will see what that signature looks like. Now for Jerry, I'm going to log into a frevvo space. A frevvo space is sort of like a portal that users can use to access any of your forms and workflows and also their task list. So if I go to Jerry's task list, I can see that purchase order from Maya that was submitted just now. I can open it up. I can also view the data that Maya entered and her signature. Now I cannot edit any of it. You'll see it's all disabled. And this signature itself is green, which lets me know that that data is valid and has not been tampered with. I'm going to go ahead and approve it. And then I will sign it. Now in this case, it's still identifying my, or verifying my identity in the background, but it's asking for a drawn or wet signature there. You'll get the same message about digitally signed, identity verified, and you'll get the same unique ID. Okay. Now I am going to approve it and send it to the vendor. So this should send an email to my email address. Let's go over and find that. It'll take just a minute for it to come through. When I rehearsed this yesterday, it took a minute for this email to come through, but usually emails are pretty instantaneous. I think it's a matter of my browser getting updated. Alrighty, Well, in the meantime, I'm going to log out as Jerry just to make sure I have a fresh browser whenever it does come through. And we'll just come back over to our slide deck for a moment to kind of check in with that identity verification. So both the employee and the manager signature, they were checking all of these blocks, including the reliable identification of parties and securing that data from tampering. Now, the email signature, whenever my email does in fact come through, is going to do the same thing. Okay, well, I'm sorry, guys. This is like the curse of the live webinar. Of course, the email doesn't come through when we're live. So we'll give that another minute. In the meantime, I may be able to just show you how I can actually check on the status of that. So I'm right here still logged in as the designer of this form. And I'm going to go to the task list. So, and this is the kind of thing that might happen. You know, your vendor says, hey, I didn't get that email, right? So I can go to the task list, check workflow admin because I have workflow admin permissions on this. And I'm going to select that basic purchase order process and search for it. And here I can actually see that task and look at the audit trail of it. Now, if you remember, being able to audit each step of a digital transaction was one of those criteria. So I can actually see that it is, did I actually submit it as Jerry? Maybe that's the problem. I think I found the problem, guys. I forgot to hit submit. So let's go back to that. Oh no, it's gone. Okay, well, I don't know what's going on. My email is just slow, I think. But we can see that it was in fact submitted for the email Megan Ellis. All right, I'm gonna do one more check of my email and see if we have it yet. I'm really sorry, I do not know why we're not seeing it. Let's just make sure it didn't come through in another folder. Okay. Interesting. So let's see if I have the ability to just sort of reset it to my email address. It's possible I had a typo or something along those lines. Okay. I must have had a typo because now I can see that the task has come through. So I'm going to copy this link. I can also see it came through 4 minutes ago, which is bizarre that I didn't see it. So anyway, I'm copying the link. I'm logging out of frevvo, and then I'm going to go to this link as an anonymous user. So I'm now acting as the vendor who is not logged into frevvo in any way. I'm going to say that this is approved, and then just as before, click sign this section. But now you'll see that the light box is a little different. It's asking me to verify my email. So if I type in Megan Ellis at frevvo.co, which is the wrong email address, it's going to say, hey, that doesn't match the email that this notification was sent to. So frevvo in the background, it knows which email this task was assigned to, and it's verifying whatever's entered here against that email. And that doesn't matter whether it's hard-coded or set dynamically at runtime. frevvo will know what it is. If I set it to the correct email, it's all good. I can then enter my name and give it a little sign. And again, this is locking down that section, showing that unique ID. And it's also showing digitally signed, but this time it says email verified. So you can kind of see the difference between email verified and identity verified. All right, we'll go ahead and finish that PO. I get a nice little confirmation. And now I'm going to come back on over to frevvo. And we're going to take a look at the submission for that purchase order. So if I go in here to view submissions, I will see this Maya Hoffman order that we just submitted in my submission table. Now from here, I can take a look at the PDF. Again, I can see all of those digital signatures right on that PDF. I can also look at the signatures tab here, and it's going to show me which section was signed and also the first and last name of the person who signed it and the date stamp. So that can be very helpful as well when you're looking for an audit trail of who signed what, and that also meets the criteria for document retention because it's saved here in your submission repository. You could also retain your documents by using an integration, such as emailing your documents, saving them to Google Drive, a file system, SharePoint, your database. There's really a number of different integrations that you can build into frevvo to save and share your form submissions. All right, so with our little hiccup with my email for some reason, that brings us back to the slideshow. So we have pretty much covered all of the 3 different types of legally binding digital signatures in frevvo. And we've shown you also how easy it is to use with drag and drop tools, point and click visual, custom logic, and dynamic assignments. So I would love to take your questions at this point. Sam, did we have any questions?
Yeah, 1 second, let me get those up. Okay, so the first one is this available for on-premise customers as well as cloud?
Yes, absolutely. So on-premise customers have access to all of the same signatures as cloud. One little caveat is that the email verification was introduced, I believe, in version 10. That is the latest supported version for on-premise, but if you happen to be on an older version and you haven't upgraded yet, you'll need to upgrade to use specifically email verification, but otherwise, you will still have identity verification and the email field, the signature field as well.
Okay, and then we just had another one come through. Is it possible to change the font of the text or signature image?
That is a good question. I don't think that you can change the font of that signature. However, you can upload signature images for users if you prefer.
Okay, and then this one kind of goes hand in hand with that on-premise question is there an additional cost to use the signature feature?
Oh, good question. No, actually, the digital signature feature is built into frevvo, so it'll come along with your on-premise license or cloud subscription. There's no extra cost. You can have as many digital signatures as you want.
Okay, and it looks like we just got another one. So this one is, does your system work with the government PIV card for seamless sign-on and built-in identity verification?
Oh, that is a good question. I don't know that off the top of my head, but we will mark that down, and maybe Sam, you can take a note of who asked that, and we can look into that and get back to you. I know that it will work with a Topaz signature pad. We have that specifically documented, and there may be a way to work with other authentication, like the government PIV card, but I'm not sure off the top of my head. We'll have to look into that.
Okay, and then it looks like this one, this question is personal identity verification HSPD 12. I'm not sure, I don't know if we can let somebody talk at this point and expand on that, but
I think we'll take note of who asked that, and we'll reach out to you offline so that we can get a little more information about your specific use case, and then we can look in to see if that capability is available.
Perfect. Okay, here's another one. We're getting a lot of great questions. This one is, can you submit other documents for signatures, or is the signature feature only available as part of a form?
Well, one thing that you might, I think what you're referring to is like, can I apply a signature to another PDF, like a government W-4, for example? And the answer is actually yes. And in fact, let me just pull in a PDF really quick to show you. frevvo has a feature where you can actually map your form data to an uploaded PDF template. So that's used quite commonly in the case of government forms, or maybe before you adopted frevvo, your company has their own pre-formatted PDFs and you don't really want to change that look. You can upload those to frevvo and then use this mapping feature to map your form data over to the form. And that does include mapping the signature as well. So I didn't demo that in today's webinar, but we do have actually a digital signatures video. It's only about 5 minutes long. And you can find that on our website, and it shows the mapping a signature over to a PDF like this. Hopefully that would help. So you would still use the frevvo digital signature, and then you would just map it to the PDF document.
Okay, ready for the next one? So this
Sure.
one is, does your solution work such that I can do everything within a singular workflow where I can add content in a fillable set of fields, then route the workflow to one or more approvers who have to sign the document?
100%. Like, that is what frevvo is built for. So in fact, that purchase order is just a very, very simplified example of that, but we have customers using frevvo for really highly sophisticated workflows that go to dozens of approvers, and that also route dynamically to different approvers based on runtime data. You know, you may not know who the approvers are until the form gets entered, and you can build all of that dynamic approval behavior into frevvo. So you can do a single form that routes to a number of approvers, multiple forms that route to different approvers. It's all very dynamic. And if you visit our documentation, I'll give you a great resource to see some of the different workflow patterns that are available. Docs.frevvo.com will be your best friend. And under the user's guide and designing workflows, you'll see this workflow design patterns page. And so we have a number of different commonly used patterns, and also sort of some examples of what type of workflow they might be good for. You can use any of these patterns. There's examples of them in the documentation below. And you can also combine the patterns. So you can really have a workflow of any complexity with frevvo.
Okay, this is another good one, Megan. It's, can this replace DocuSign, or is it meant to complement an existing signature solution?
I would say this can replace DocuSign.
Okay. Would the signatures comply with federal regs like HIMSS?
I'm not familiar with HIMSS, but it does meet the eSign and UETA acts, and the identical, or what's the word I'm looking for? Not identical, but the corresponding state laws. So I would say for most use cases, they should in fact be legally binding, but you may want to double check whatever HIMSS is against our documentation to make sure that it meets all the requirements.
Okay, and then here we have another one. Does the solution work with Microsoft Outlook 365 such that I can request a digital signature from Outlook 365 and still execute the workflow successfully from behind the federal firewall?
I'm not familiar with Outlook 365 well enough to answer that question, but I would say, Sam, let's again take note of this, and we'll take it offline, and our engineers can take a look at that and see if our solution would meet those requirements.
Okay, and then this one is, I think this will be the last one unless another one comes through, is, can I use my existing Active Directory to authenticate users?
Yes, absolutely. So if you have Active Directory, you can connect, you can purchase the frevvo LDAP Security Manager. If you're using like Google or Okta or another SAML type authentication, our SAML Security Manager will connect to those. We also have a Azure specific security manager. So you can pretty much connect frevvo to any existing authentication IDP.
Okay. This one is a little bit different. They're asking, please explain why signatures are not passed to DocuWare.
I believe that they are. frevvo actually has a DocuWare connector. So we don't have time to cover that in today's webinar, but I can certainly point you to the documentation on that. So if you look under integrations, we have a DocuWare connector. I'll pop this into the chat for you. And that I don't see any reason why they wouldn't. So if you're finding that they're not, please do reach out to our support team, and they're happy to help you with whatever you're seeing there.
Okay, and this, I don't see any others coming through at the moment, so this might be the last one. I'm not making a promise, but can you have multiple signatures on a form, i.e. such as a signer and a witness?
Yes, yeah, there's no limit to how many signatures you can have on a form. You know, digital signatures are one per section, but you can have as many sections as you want. You can have sections inside of sections, and you can also drag as many of those signature fields to your form as you want.
Great.
No limit.
And it looks like that was the last question, unless somebody wants to jump in the chat and ask their question. I think we covered them all.
Wonderful. Well, I appreciate the active audience. We love all these questions. And thank you again for joining us. One quick thing before we leave, I did want to point out, and I'll put this in the chat as well, we have a great blog article that we published last year, but is still quite relevant, that covers this topic, including what makes signatures legally binding. This will be a great reference point for you, especially if you're checking frevvo's you know, legally binding status against whatever the laws are in your state or district. This resource should help you out a lot. And we thank you so much for joining us today. Please do reach out to us at info@frevvo.com if you have any further questions, and enjoy the rest of your week.